Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's fourth space. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Voices of the Dead, Adapting the Unadaptable, Pedro Páramo.
Hola a todos y bienvenidos al espacio 4 o al Fourth Space de la Universidad de Concordia. Muchas gracias por venir hoy al evento Voces de los Muertos, adaptando el inadaptable Pedro Páramo.
We would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, and we respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community.
Nos gustaría comenzar reconociendo que la Universidad de Concordia se encuentra establecida en tierras indígenas no cedidas en Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Respetamos las conexiones constantes con el pasado, el presente y el futuro en nuestras relaciones con los pueblos indígenas dentro de la comunidad de Montreal.
Here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge. We co-create daily activities that examine research questions, projects, things happening across the university.
Y aquí en el espacio 4 trabajamos con nuestra comunidad universitaria para ayudar a movilizar el conocimiento mediante la co-creación de actividades y eventos diarios, y así explorando las preguntas de investigación y proyectos en desarrollo a través de la universidad.
And we're running today's event as a live stream to both YouTube and as a Zoom meeting. So those of you joining us via Zoom, we welcome your comments and questions via the chat. And for those of you here in the space, if you have any comments or questions later on, just raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone over to you.
Estamos llevando a cabo el evento de hoy a través de una transmisión en vivo por nuestro canal de YouTube y también una reunión de Zoom. Entonces, para las personas en línea, nos pueden dejar sus preguntas o comentarios en el chat de reunión o pueden levantar la mano virtual. Y para las personas asistiendo en persona, agradecemos sus preguntas y comentarios. Y si gustan participar, nada más levanten la mano y alguien de nuestro equipo les puede traer un micrófono.
With that, it's now my pleasure to hand the mic over to the International Project Manager, Concordia International, Julio Sevilla. Julio, over to you.
Thank you, Douglas. Can you hear me? Bonjour tout le monde. Je m'appelle Julio Sevilla. Je suis responsable du projet international Concordia International. Et je suis très content de vous accueillir ici à Concordia. Thank you for joining us, for those that joined us at the screening of the movie just a few minutes ago. For those of you that are joining us online, thank you for also take the time to sign in and join us in this very interesting conversation. Before we start, allow me just a couple of minutes to thank first my colleagues from Concordia International who helped to organize this event, Vanessa, Suzanne, and of course our Vice President and Chief of Staff of the President, William Chave, that supported this event. Also, I would like to thank Douglas and Fourth Space, Isabel and Jacqueline for all the great work with the logistic and making sure that we all can have this conversation. Fourth Space, it's a space dedicated at Concordia to disseminate not just science and technology produced at the university, but also cultural events like this one. Es un placer poder darles la bienvenida en la Universidad Concordia. Quiero aprovechar también para reiterar el compromiso que tenemos en la universidad con nuestra relación con México. Este evento es un ejemplo de la cooperación que podemos tener entre nuestras comunidades. Y Concordia siempre ha tenido las puertas abiertas para la comunidad latinoamericana y mexicana. Algunos ejemplos de nuestro trabajo con México incluyen el establecimiento reciente de una oficina de la Universidad Autónoma de México, UNAM, en Concordia, que podrá facilitar el trabajo entre México y la universidad. También estamos trabajando en otros proyectos como el Queen Elizabeth Scholars para poder integrar jóvenes mexicanos y de Concordia en proyectos de investigación. En fin, hay mucho trabajo que hacer y creo que este tipo de eventos nos permiten construir estos puentes que tanto necesitamos en estos tiempos. Antes que nada, quiero agradecer también al cónsul Treviño y a nuestro amigo Remigio Valdés Hoyos por también esta gran colaboración, y al Gobierno de México y a la Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores, felicitarles por ese trabajo de difusión de nuestra cultura, de la cultura mexicana en todo el mundo. Sin más que agregar, quiero invitar al cónsul Treviño a decir algunas palabras. Gracias.
Gracias, Julio Sevilla. Nuevamente, thank you very much. I warmly congratulate Concordia University, the Mexican Cultural Institute, and all those who have made this event possible. I also extend a special recognition to our distinguished panelists, including filmmaker Juan Carlos Rufo. Y bueno, simplemente quiero señalar que ya lo mencionaba Julio, tenemos una relación muy importante ahora con la Universidad Concordia, con la presencia, estamos hablando de fechas muy importantes, se cumplen 30 años de UNAM Canadá y justamente en la ciudad de Gatineau, y justamente la UNAM está también teniendo una colaboración aquí ya presente en Concordia en Montreal. Estamos cumpliendo, pues hoy estamos celebrando de la publicación de Pedro Páramo justamente 70 años de la publicación de la obra del maestro Juan Rulfo. Y bueno, pues me parece muy importante también señalar la colaboración entre la Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores y Netflix para que podamos tener esta nueva adaptación cinematográfica del director Rodrigo Prieto. Yo quisiera simplemente, para provocar un poco a los panelistas, pues reflexionar sobre el panorama audiovisual global, donde las plataformas como Netflix están transformando la forma en que las historias llegan a todo el mundo. Esto nos invita pues a hacer una reflexión sobre una pregunta clave. ¿Cómo se puede adaptar una obra literaria tan profunda para el público global sin perder su esencia? ¿Qué se gana? ¿Qué se transforma? ¿Y qué desafíos surgen en este proceso? Para el consulado, apoyar estas iniciativas es esencial. Esperemos que esta discusión inspire nuevas ideas, nuevas colaboraciones y una renovada apreciación por la riqueza de la expresión cultural mexicana. Muchas gracias.
Oh, hello, everyone. Welcome. Buenas tardes y bienvenido. Bienvenido. That's the limit of my Spanish, I'm afraid. I just, we're going to have a little word just before we start and I introduce the panel. We're going to have a little word from Remigio Valdés de Hoyos, who is the director of the Mexican Cultural Institute in Montreal. Remigio, do you want to say a word? I thought you wanted to.
Thank you very much, Martin, to invite me to say something. It's just, I'm just so excited to have Juan Carlos Rulfo in this table. I want to thank him to be here. And for me, so it's a big emotion to see him after how many years, Juan Carlos? We met when we were young, and all the family. Rulfo was like my family. When I lived with his brother in Paris, and I was lucky to know also personally to Juan Rulfo, their father. So for me, it's quite exciting to have this table with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Remigio. So I'll just start by introducing the members of our panel here at Concordia University in Montreal, and as well online. We have 3 members of our panel online. So I'll do this alphabetically. We'll start with Katia Andrea Morales Gaitan, who recently completed a joint doctorate at Université de Montréal and Université Paris 3, Sorbonne Nouvelle. Her research centers on intellectual property and audiovisual works available through platforms, focusing on actor networks and neo-colonial dynamics, investigating the epistemological, legal, and financial implications of the centralized platforms in the film industry. Next, online with us, we have Juan Carlos Rulfo, who is a prize-winning documentary filmmaker working out of Mexico. He has directed well over 20 films, as well as a TV documentary series. This includes In the Pit in 2006, which won the Grand Jury Prize for International Documentary at Sundance. He's the son of Juan Rulfo, and in 2017 directed a 7-episode documentary series on his father, one episode of which, 100 Years with Juan Rulfo, is currently available here on Netflix. Next, we're also joined by 2 colleagues from the Mel Hoppenheim School of Cinema. Masha Sarashkina is a specialist of transnational film history, whose work explores global exchanges in film theory, politics, and culture, with particular attention to Latin America and Soviet cinemas. Her first book was actually on Eisenstein in Mexico, and more recently, she has written a book on the Soviet reception of the 1971 Mexican romance Yesenia. Her book on world socialist cinema has won important recognition in academia and beyond, and she's widely recognized for her expertise in the intersections of film, ideology, and cultural transfers. Next, we have Mark Steinberg, also professor of film studies and Concordia University Research Chair in Media Industries. His work focuses on Japanese animation, media mix practices, and global media industries. He's widely regarded as a leading scholar on transnational media flows and contemporary screen cultures. And he's a renowned authority in the study of platform media since the publication of his influential book, The Platform Economy. He has written on Netflix and teaches a course entitled The Netflix Effect. Next, online with us, we have Paulina Milan Vargas, who joins us from Mexico, trained as an art historian at La UNAM in Mexico City. She has since been teaching at the Tecnológico de Monterrey at the Mexico City campus. She is an authority on the photographic work of Juan Rulfo, having won several awards for her research dedicated to Rulfo, including the Alfonso Caso Medal for Academic Merit. She is the author of several articles and chapters on Rulfo's photographic work, and she both collaborated in the research for Juan Carlos Rulfo's series dedicated to his father. And our final panelist is Doug Weatherford, who is professor of Spanish and Portuguese at Brigham Young University in Utah, from where he joins us. His research focuses on Latin American literature and film, representation of the period of discovery and conquest in Latin America, as well as mid-century Mexico. He's a specialist of both Rosario Castellanos and Juan Rulfo. And in fact, he has translated all of Rulfo's work into English, including the latest edition of Pedro Páramo, which I have here in my hands. And prior to shooting, actually, the latest adaptation of the novel to the screen, the one that we are going to be discussing today mostly, Doug sent filmmaker Rodrigo Prieto a review of the screenplay that was initially written by Mateo Gil. He has written extensively on Rulfo and on previous film adaptations of his work, and can also be seen in Juan Carlos Rulfo's documentaries on his father. So welcome, everyone. Really happy to see you all here today. So I want to thank you in accepting our invitation to this informal. It's going to be an informal roundtable. Perhaps I realized I forgot to introduce myself, I think. I'm Martin Lefebvre. I'm the chair of the Mel Hoppenheim School of Cinema here at Concordia University. I'm going to be moderating this informal conversation, the roundtable discussion, the pretext of which being the recent film adaptation of Pedro Páramo by Rodrigo Prieto for Netflix. And some of us here in the room have just seen the film projected on a large screen. And as worth mentioning, this is the third adaptation of Rulfo's novel. For those of you, so there was an adaptation in 1967, followed by one a decade later. For those of you who, I doubt there's a lot of people around this room, but for those of you perhaps online who don't know the novel, we can say briefly that it has become a foundational text of modern Mexican literature. And even more broadly speaking, of Latin American literature. In fact, my Mexican friends tell me that it has become almost required reading in high schools in Mexico. So for generations, I don't know if it's still the case today, my friends are close to my age, so they're a little bit older than some of the people who might be listening online, or if we have some of our students, for instance, but certainly for a generation, at least it was just a required reading. Everyone knew about this novel in Mexico. And I discovered it myself when I was studying world literature in CEGEP, alongside the work of Cuban writer Alejo Carpentier, Colombian writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and fellow Mexican writer Carlos Fuentes, who actually participated, Carlos Fuentes, in the script for the 1967 adaptation of Pedro Páramo. Now, adapting a literary monument into a film is never an easy task. It was François Truffaut, the French filmmaker, who said it was better for filmmakers to adopt little-known novels to the screen, so has to have more leeway in adapting and appropriating the material of a book, something which he did a lot when he adapted a book to the screen. And so from that perspective, let me start by asking Doug if you wouldn't mind a little bit, because I know you've done this, Doug, you've written about this, if you wouldn't mind comparing a little bit the three adaptations of Pedro Páramo, the 1967 version by Carlos Velo, starring Hollywood actor John Gavin in the title role, the 1977 version by Jose Bolaños, and now this new version by Rodrigo Prieto. And I'd like to know what strikes you when you watch these three versions in the way that they approach the literary material, which has been celebrated in large measure for its polyphonic narrative structure, the fact that there's all these voices that are making this novel into something that is not linear, that surprises the viewer, and that asks the reader, and that asks a lot, actually, from the reader to connect all these pieces into a whole narrative. So, Doug, any thoughts on the three adaptations in this regard?
Yeah, you bet. And that's a lot to cover, I would say. As Juan Carlos knows well, he's heard me talk about these adaptations a lot. What I can say, perhaps first of all, is that Juan Rulfo, in many respects, is a novel that was written with film in mind, and there are a lot of filmic qualities to it. And yet, it's interesting that it has been one of the novels that notoriously has been very difficult to adapt. So much so that in the 1980s, there was a Mexican journalist who asked, ¿Es Juan Rulfo posible en el cine? Is Juan Rulfo possible in film? I can say that yes, he is, but many of the adaptations of this novel and some of his short stories and other things feel like they have come up short. Perhaps one of the things that I would first like to point out is that the connections of this novel to film are a fascinating story. And so, of course, the most recent adaptation, 2024, is directed. It's the first full-length film directed by a cinematographer, right? Somebody who's made his career in Mexico and Hollywood as a director of photography. He's a four-time, I believe, Oscar nominee in that category, and all of a sudden here he is directing a work. And so he is a really interesting individual to look at as somebody who's trying to tackle an important Mexican novel and as his first feature-length film as a director. But if you go back to and I usually use the years 1966, 1976. They were released in 67, 76, 77. So if I use those dates, just know that we're talking about the same film. But especially the first one by Carlos Bello. The individuals who wrote, the individual who was primarily responsible for writing the screenplay was the director, Carlos Bello, but as well as Carlos Fuentes. And Gabriel Garcia Marquez was a reader of that screenplay. And then Rulfo actually does have a second novel, much less known, called El Gallo de Oro, where Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the Colombian Nobel Prize-winning author, was, along with Carlos Fuentes, the primary authors of that film script. And that's a fascinating story. In fact, if I can just make perhaps a personal plug, just in 2020, I was able to gather those screenplays for Pedro Páramo and for El Gallo de Oro that includes the work of Carlos Fuentes and Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And so that somebody can look at those adaptations and see how two other really important Latin American writers interact. And so between Juan Rulfo, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and Carlos Fuentes working between film and literature, we have, three of the great writers of the 20th century of the Americas. Of Mexico and Colombia, but of the Americas. And so it really is an important and interesting story. What I can say about the three adaptations is that I love all three of them. And there are moments in which I am thrilled at the way they brought to life Juan Rulfo's world. But there are also moments where I am disappointed in all three. And at some point, perhaps somebody will need to take bits and pieces from each of the three adaptations and put them together and see if that will make us have, the perfect adaptation of of Pedro Páramo. We can talk, if you would like, about some of the things that I most like about each one of the adaptations. I did have the privilege, and it was a privilege, of interacting with Rodrigo Prieto before filming began, and I offered to give him a review of some of the elements of the screenplay that Mateo Gil wrote. And so I saw the screenplay beforehand. I kind of knew some of the strengths, many of the strengths. There are a lot of strengths to this film. I also surmised perhaps some of the places where I might be a little bit less satisfied, and there certainly are those moments. But what I can say is that I'm thrilled anytime a filmmaker is willing to consider the work of Juan Rulfo to make a film. And I don't, I can point out some of the weaknesses of each film, but I don't want to dwell on those too frequently because I'm thrilled that people have the opportunity to discover the written work of Juan Rulfo through the film versions that they see. In fact, the first thing by Juan Rulfo that I was exposed to was the 1966 adaptation by Carlos Velo. And so that in many ways led me to the novel, and then of course a career working on Juan Rulfo. So there's a lot to celebrate here, a few things we can complain about, but I'm thrilled that Rodrigo Prieto has given us another version of the great Mexican novel.
Thank you, Doug. I want to say, if anyone wants to I'm going to address questions to each of you, but if anyone wants to chime in and add to the conversation as we go about, please do. It's an open discussion. But let me take what you just said, Doug, and ask Juan Carlos, from a different perspective, of course, how this new adaptation feels to you from the inside, you could say. I mean, Juan Rulfo was your father. You have worked on the legacy of your father. You have been interested in the imaginary world that he has created. And so how is it for you to see that world? And of course, you're also a filmmaker in your own right. So how is it for you to navigate this material when you watch this film? And probably a question that is ridiculous, but do you think your father would have accepted this version of the film? Yeah, we can't hear you for now, but
yeah, sorry.
Here we go.
Yes, one day I'm going to ask him what about that things. Hopefully, much more years like now. Okay, I'm going to speak in Spanish because it's really complicated for me to explain it. Toda la vida he trabajado en las atmósferas de mi padre, sobre todo las atmósferas familiares. Y hay algo que pasa, que siempre ha estado en casa, la pregunta, ¿qué se siente ser hijo de este señor? ¿De qué trata Pedro Páramo? ¿Qué quiso decir tu padre? Y todo el tiempo llega la gente y me dice lo que debe de ser, o lo que debe de decir, o de qué trata. Eso es muy curioso. En este caso, con las adaptaciones, siento que cada película, las tres versiones que Douglas acaba de expresar, si cada película es víctima de su tiempo en la concepción visual de las atmósferas, de la cinematografía, del quehacer en el cine, en particular en México. La de Carlos Velo en los 60 pues era toda una historia que tenía que ver con el fin de una época dorada del cine mexicano, una narrativa bastante lineal, era una manera de entender la novela. La siguiente obra, la siguiente pieza en los 70 también lo fue, un poco más oscura, un poco más introspectiva, pero seguían siendo relatos lineales. Y ahora con Rodrigo Prieto estamos en la época de las plataformas, en donde pues yo creo que hay como muchas restricciones también en la forma de poder pensar o de qué es lo que quiere la plataforma. O sea, de entrada, la plataforma te pide cierto éxito, hay muchos millones de dólares invertidos y hay tal vez no mucha oportunidad de riesgo, ¿no? Yo creo que desde que está esta película, la versión de Rodrigo, se abren las posibilidades de poder entonces arriesgar más, equivocarse más y tratar de buscar atmósferas muchísimo más cinematográficas en el sentido, como Douglas dice, de las que la novela misma expresa, ¿sí? Siento que la novela habla de las imágenes, pero también aquí están muy claras las imágenes que cada cineasta piensa e imagina según la época de la filmografía de la que estamos hablando. A mí me gustaría que fuera mucho más experimental, mucho más arriesgada en términos de narrativas, Creo que la cinematografía universal tiene esos juegos, ha jugado, pienso en Tarkovsky, pienso en los cineastas iraníes, pienso en el cine alemán, no sé. Pero se me hace un poco, siento que esta adaptación, sin que sea una versión equivocada, siento que es muy loable el intento, pero básicamente siento eso, que es una película para plataforma en la que mucha gente que no ha entendido la novela y que no ha leído la obra, ahora puede entenderla de alguna manera, de una forma relativamente lineal. De inclusive empezaron a decir, qué bueno, mira, ya escribieron el libro, después de haber visto la película, o chistes de ese tipo. Ya entendí la novela, o cosas así. Bueno, creo que queda pendiente todavía el hacer esta otra versión y se abre la puerta y estoy muy contento porque finalmente lo que me ha pasado a mí es que al estar en los lugares donde vivió mi padre o donde ha ido Paulina y Douglas, uno siente ciertas texturas en el aire y en la materia, en las paredes. Uno reconoce la voz con la que mi padre estuvo recogiendo todas estas historias alrededor de su vida. Y lo que me ha pasado es que creo que no confían mucho en esas voces. Creo que los autores quieren plantear el universo que ellos conocen, pero no han ido a estos lugares y vivido de una manera profunda y real, que básicamente es la intimidad de un país. Y ahí es donde uno se separa y entonces comienza uno a ver la película en términos, le voy a contar una historia y punto. Pero Rulfo tal vez se quedó pendiente. Entonces ya no aplico ese rigor de lo que podría haber sido. Como dice Douglas, hay escenas muy buenas y hay escenas muy malas. Hay un casting irregular y hay personajes muy bien. Entonces tal vez podemos hacer un collage de todas estas secuencias del cine rulfiano en general y poder tal vez crear un storyboard de lo que quisiéramos. Hay una película que hizo mi padre con todo el afán de querer hacer su cine, lo pueden ver en YouTube, que se llama El Despojo. Es un cortometraje de media hora, 20 minutos tal vez, en donde se ve tal vez esa experiencia. Es un asunto mucho más experimental, de tiempos muertos, de silencios, muy curioso. Y ahí están las lecciones. Entonces, creo que para empezar podría ser, no son, un poco siguiendo el título de la conferencia Voices of the Dead, para mí Fulfo es más bien Voices of the Life, porque todos están de alguna manera hablando de lo que fue una vida. Y nosotros no nos damos cuenta que estos ecos que están en todas partes están recordándonos lo que fue un momento muy particular en la vida de todos los personajes que están en la novela y en la vida de muchas historias que están alrededor de nosotros. Por ejemplo, ustedes pueden ir a una casa vacía, abandonada, y hay una atmósfera muy especial desde que entramos y uno siente que hay presencias, ¿no? Y eso es lo que le pasa a Juan Preciado cuando entra a este pueblo, cuando llega a este lugar. Hay una cantidad de presencias y mi padre lo que hizo fue hacerlas hablar y pues son tan fuertes que finalmente Juan Preciado sucumbe ante la fuerza del recuerdo y la memoria de lo que fue pasado y de lo que fue la historia personal. Pero bueno, si quieren lo dejo ahí para continuar después.
Thank you. Yes.
It is clear, sorry. I'm not sure if
Yes.
okay.
And I want to come back to adaptation a little bit later as well, because I think it's an interesting film to talk about adaptation. But you mentioned something I'll piggyback on, which is you said, well, it's a Netflix movie. And so I'd like to ask here, Katya and Mark, a little bit about this. You know, given the status of the novel, given the status of Juan Rulfo in Mexico, does this, first of all, does this adaptation surprise you? Is this part of Netflix global strategy to attract non-US viewers with the well-known literary material? I mean, we've seen this elsewhere happen before. Certainly after the war in France, there was a push to adapt French literary classics to the screen in order to mark the territory and bring French people to the theaters because they were going in droves to see all those backlogged American films that were now coming on French soil. And it was a clear strategy to go into the depths of French culture and adapt literary classics to the screen. Of course, this is eventually what led to the New Wave as a revolt against those adaptations, which were understood to be somewhat stifling. So is Netflix, in the new context of platforms, replaying this this scenario? And so also, is Netflix doing this elsewhere? Is it doing this globally? Is it doing this in Asia and Africa? And do you think, and I think here I'm connecting with what you said, Juan Carlos, do you think the film could have been more adventurous formally if it hadn't been produced for the platform, if it hadn't been produced for Netflix? I mean, is there a Netflix format? And if there is, I mean, what exactly is it? And this seems to me an important question because Netflix has created a model for global producing, not just global distribution, that perhaps we've never really seen before to this extent. I mean, they're producing films around the world. So how does that fit into their strategy? And could this film have been different on Netflix or outside of Netflix? Both of you.
Thank you. First, hello. Yeah, just wanted to say thank you to former director of the Mexican Cultural Institute of the Consulate, Remigio Valdez de Hoyos, for inviting me to share this roundtable with you. Also, Professor Martin Lefebvre and Ambassador Victor Treviño for the opportunity of being here. So yes, Netflix adapts acclaimed novels, Pedro Páramo, of course, because this means a low risk in terms of economic and inversions and investment. So they want to build a rich catalog and to generate prestige. So at first they were working with other filmmakers. Probably the first film was Roma, in more authorial aesthetics, but Cuarón, Guillermo del Toro, etc. They've been also develop their career into the Hollywood space. So that means to bring this kind of aesthetics, narrative, rhythms, and into the screen to appeal global audiences. Yes, they've been, Netflix in 2021 bought the Dow Rowe story company, known for the Charlie Chocolate Factory, and other very popular story for young and kids audiences. So they can also acquire these intellectual properties and make other content, such as video games, interactive or immersive VR content, of course, music, books. So they can monetize and have different avenues of resources to their financial structure. So this is a kind of platform imperialism, as Dal Yin will mention. It's acting as a dominated, and it's been invading local markets, erasing local agents and institutions. So I think this is also very important aspect to discuss, because still this is a scholarly and critique point of view. So yeah, all these social imaginaries, the references and the symbolic representations of Mexico and Latam. They need to fit into global. There's sort of a whitewashing also of the status of the society, and this is represented in the film. So yeah, there are the new gatekeepers, and they also the censors. They have a dual role in mediating consumption and controlling the content. Of course, they will also employ a marketing strategy. They want to segment the audiences, but they, through, for example, changing the title for Pedro Páramo, there's no need to change the title because it's absolutely the master's top literary piece of Mexican history. But they will somehow adapt to different audiences. And I definitely think that, I don't know, but probably who will make this new, more risk experimental film that will reflect the true essence of this novel. That's what I love.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I come to this from the outside, being more of a scholar of Asian cinema and platforms. And so, I think I want to go back to the question about format. And is there a Netflix format? And you could think about it as a film style, but you can also think about it, first and foremost, as a serial style, right? Their format is so often television. And in a way, a lot of the scholarship on Netflix has been by television scholars, because it's seen as a sort of serial format. And in the case of the other examples, for example, the first major investment into Japan that they made was a translation of a nationally acclaimed novel, then a more recent one, but it had just won like the equivalent of the Booker Prize of National Literature, Hibana, into Spark. And this is a maybe 12-part series, and they used comics, they used major actors from a lot of the of television, and so there's a lot more of a television connection. So my point of interest in this film is in a way that it's a film, right? That it's not a television series, and maybe I wonder if there are discussions at some point about whether this should be a television series or not. But just looking at the Netflix's press release, because it's part of a strategy, it's part of a global strategy, but it's also really part of a local strategy. And here, maybe I find the platform imperialism is sometimes a little bit too broad of a category, because they think, I think Netflix often operates as local in its effects. And maybe this is a conversation definitely to have, because it's important to have a kind of critical view of who is coming in and making things. But that, in a way, so I looked up, Pedro Páramo and what's Netflix saying about it. And it was released as a part of a series of National Day of Mexican Cinema films that, happens every August 15th, which ties into kind of government policy around filmmaking, right? That we need to promote films around our National Cinema Day, and that they promised other series of adaptations because of the success of this film, including the one you mentioned, Aura, the Carlos Fuentes novel, to the screen. So I'm curious about the continuing effects that this film is going to have in a way. Yeah, has that come out yet? Aura or Aura? Yeah, okay. And is this going to be a trend where, in fact, Netflix is known here in the Mexican context more in terms of its cinema rather than its television series? But it's also, that's a question more than I don't know.
Do you guys think that in doing something like Pedro Páramo, they're whitewashing the critique of sort of cultural colonialism that they're doing, while on one hand presenting content that is local, but adapting a format that is not local in terms of its cinematicness and in terms of its film format itself. What's interesting with some of the filmmakers who have made films for Netflix, in local environments, they have been a platform for them in a different sense. That is to say, like they've bounced off of it on the American scene. And here it's a little bit different. We have an A-lister cinematographer who's worked with Scorsese, who's worked he did Barbie, he's worked with Inarritu, he's worked with a whole number of people. And Netflix is giving him the opportunity to make his first feature film locally, but in a style that could potentially serve him so that he could go to Hollywood, right? And become a director. So I'm just wondering about the sort of cultural and economic relations that are at play in this.
Yes, we are very dependent as a country from many. We receive the impacts in Mexico of the film industry. Just to focus on that, yeah, it's definitely a good. It's very. There's a phrase we say, México, tan lejos de Dios, tan cerca de los Estados Unidos. Because our economy is absolutely linked to the American, to the United States. So for instance, it's very good to have and this year in February, Ted Sarandos was talking with Doctora Claudia Sheinbaum, our president, in her everyday morning conference, and they announced an investment of $1 billion. And of course, this was like very celebrated because of the spin-over that will happen in other industries such as tourism, the locations, and since also because of the proximity of Mexico to LA, it become a hub, right? Mexico City, it's also like where the headquarters of Latin American operations of Netflix are based. So I think it's like a double game because they're also investing in Estudios Churubusco, for example. So that part, I think we're lacking a focus on a public cultural policy to, yes, welcome foreign investors, but also having specific law, specific management to promote, to make sure that the other cinemas, I am very fan of Juan Carlos Rulfo because he works with a lot with documentaries, and I hope he will do the third or the fourth version of his father's book. But let's say, I mean, the problem with the narratives or the powerful and everyone has a Netflix account, right? Is that we're lacking the other expressions, the other versions of creating art, basically. And therefore, we will also need to be protective. And we, as French cultural policy, have always defended l'exception culturelle in order to just, have a different treatment and protect and make public institutions stronger, less than just giving the keys of the city, and but that's related into politics, economics, and it's a very much more complex relation and negotiation situation of this and of course, Pedro Páramo, the movie by Rodrigo Prieto, was presented as the showcase of all the positive benefits, right? But we also must remember that for decades we've been we're a low labor country, so we also need that to appropriate and to make sure that IPs and that stays in our country, right? And benefit the local industry.
Yeah, it's complicated, and please as well, our panelists online, if you have some thoughts on this, it's complicated also because one of the things that happens is if the local filmmaker, and it's been the case here in Quebec, for instance, and I'm sure it's the same thing with Mexico, all of a sudden they have an opening to an audience that they would not have had before, right? A large audience. And that's seen as a plus from the point of view of the filmmaker, certainly, that their films are being seen, right? Because every filmmaker wants to have their film seen as widely as possible. But so is it like a deal with the devil in that sense?
Yeah, I think you're right. And there's points about the relationship of power, and even looking at the like sort of Netflix documents that were released, they're talking about the amount of jobs created, the number of hotel rooms booked, that they're emphasizing this as a we benefit the Mexican people in the production of this. So it's interesting to see it too, because it sort of is implying that they're bringing good. I'm curious more about like the global platform aspect, right? That it's like, and in a way, Latin America is one of the bigger markets for Netflix. Is it also, enabling better distribution in Latin America, as well as, North America or Asia for something like Pedro Páramo? Like, is this something that happened? Are people watching it?
Thank you. Can I ask you a question, Masha? About perhaps just thinking about what this film means now. Does it mean anything now, politically speaking, in the context of whether it's Latin American filmmaking or simply, the plot centers on two periods. We have the Mexican Revolution and its immediate aftermath, represented in the film by Pedro Páramo and his son. The character of Pedro Páramo is a clear example of what is referred to as caciquismo in Mexico, le cacique. The reign of the landowners that blossomed under the Porfiriato, the period of Porfirio Diaz's presidency, and that survived the revolution. And the novel covers roughly the era from the late 19th century until the 1920s, the period of Juan Rulfo's youth, which is a period, as seen in the film, where Kamala turns from garden to barren land. This becomes a cemetery where the dead people replace the living. And not surprisingly, the novel has sometimes been read as a critique of the revolution, of its reforms, its broken promises. So from someone who's interested in film, also from a political perspective, do you think that the film brings anything now to this? Or is it nostalgia for the literary achievements of Rulfo? Or is it using it as somehow as an allegory for the present? Is it itself a mausoleum to dead voices, or is it telling us something about the now?
Thank you. It's a big question. I just want to start by saying what a great honor it is for me to be part of this roundtable, and especially to be in the same virtual space as Juan Carlos Rulfo. Realmente es un gran honor para mí. And I think the question, of course, is, in some ways, yes, in some ways, no, right? I think in addition to the issue of the specificity of Netflix as a platform, I think this is a long story of how we have very conflicting forces at play within adaptations like this. to start with positioning, even before going to the cinematic realm, taking a novel that is as dark and subversive as it is, and turning into a centerpiece of national heritage is tricky, right? Because, you know, you're really taking something that is not like, doesn't fit very comfortably within the usual narratives that we like to create about, you know, the nation and the state of things. It's a difficult novel. It's not a fun novel. The fact that it is taught in schools, or I don't know if it still is, but it's definitely perceived as a kind of a canon, right? So the canonization of a literary work, teaching it to younger people who may not quite yet have the sort of grasp of either the political or the psychological complexities that are taught. All of it comes at a cost, right? And I think there's a kind of a de-subversifying, if I may say so, of these great literary works that takes place inevitably. And this is one example, and maybe it's even more so with the works that are modernists, and it's maybe more so with works that really, you know, are difficult and politically not, you know, not very easy to assimilate, right? And so, and then we have on the one hand, again, already this tension between the kind of demands of a national heritage and the canon. And on the other hand, once it enters into the cinematic realm in particular, there are commercial interests, and in general, kind of the idea of popularizing the canon. And that starts immediately. Again, like it's, you know, there's a nostalgic or, you know, additional elements to it the more time passes. But even, you know, as soon as the first versions are made, there's a sense that this is part of this project to popularize these great, you know, works of Latin American literature, and the people who are doing them, you know, with Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Carlos Fuentes are, especially Carlos Fuentes, is facing some of the same challenges himself. You know, again, Carlos Fuentes's work when it was being translated in the Soviet Union, in particular, you know, as part of very much celebrated canon of Latin American cinema, starting certainly with Juan Rulfo's work, you know, that they had to censor the language, right? Because there's a lot of bad language. And that's just a small example of how, you know, precisely what gave those works very often their power and the role that they played in cultural life, you know, by necessity gets sort of neutered as it enters into this kind of cultural institutional life that is celebrated, that is embraced, that, you know, becomes again an endless cycle of celebrations, et cetera. And then when it enters into the commercial cinematic sphere, you know, then it becomes popularized in the sense of like how to make it likable and accessible to a lot of people. And I'm not like criticizing either, right? I think it is really important to guard and nurture cultural heritage, national and universal. And I think it is necessary to popularize these works. You know, it's very hard to do without them. But again, the kind of tensions that are created, and especially once it becomes, you know, part of the very overtly commercial system, as was, you know, the Mexican cinema of the golden age, right? You know, I mean, as much as we love it, and, you know, I personally do as well, you know, this certainly was, had its own very clear pressures of both the kind of living up to the national ideals and projections and commercial ones, right? And it was successful for a reason. And so a kind of a engagement with this work that could preserve the atmospheric, you know, darkness, but also subversive politically and in many ways socially, reading of these novels is very difficult, right? And I personally, for example, you know, of all these many adaptations of Juan Rulfo's work, in some ways I feel like the one that is more that is closer to the original is Arturo Ripstein's version of El Gallo de Oro, the El Imperio de Fortuna. And it's not a film that anyone likes. Okay, well, I mean, some people do, and I very much appreciate it, but it's a hard film to like. But in some ways, I feel like it preserves precisely that, again, for a lack of a better word, subversiveness, the darkness, the combination of starkness, non-romanticization, uncompromising qualities of Juan Rulfo's writings. But again, those are exactly those qualities that don't lend themselves that well to either one of those projects. And yet, in spite of themselves or because they do, I do believe that a lot of the people involved in the making of these films, as Douglas was saying, are actually genuinely committed to the project of keeping these works alive. And in this case, extending them, hoping that there are more people who become who watch the films and appreciate it, and whether because they put it in relation to the earlier films or they may go read the novel, right? So it does some of that work, right? And so for all those reasons, I think all of these films in their own ways do produce some kind of a political reading of what may be the kind of the pressure points of the present day. But that happens, maybe not, I think, again, that can just happen by virtue of
and it's
being,
not over.
Yeah, of course, and it will continue. I don't particularly think personally that this film is very successful at that. I mean, of course, we can read all kinds of political meanings into it, but it certainly comes across as precisely this, very competently made sort of prestige film that,
Can I just say, I will say, so having come very much from the outside, the lasting image of the parched earth is something that we can read now in terms of the kind of environmental crisis that's going on. And that's a kind of a powerful image, the track kind of down that opens the film. And then, the back and forth between the verdant moments and the really, so anyways, just
the tracking down is, I mean, we're going to hell,
yeah,
right? We're going to the netherworld. That's clearly establishes what's going on. I'll come back to that, Ashley, later, but I wanted to ask Paulina, we haven't heard you yet. It was a discovery for me, actually, when I started looking a little bit more into Juan Rulfo to get to see that he was also a photographer. I was not aware of that. And then I watched Juan Carlos's film. And I couldn't, now I don't know his photography work, and except from what I've seen in the film and a few sources on the web. And so I was wondering whether Prieto, who's a cinematographer, was in any way interested in Juan Rulfo's photography and had taken that into consideration in making this film. In other words, if he was, sort of acknowledging Rulfo's photographic work. Now, all of the ones I've seen from Rulfo were in black and white, and clearly the film is in color, but nonetheless, do you think that there's a connection? And could you also perhaps tell us a little bit more about Juan Rulfo's photographic work?
Hola, pues bueno, yo también voy a hablar en español. Y yo, como especialista en Rulfo, generalmente siempre me mantengo al margen de hablar sobre la literatura o el cine. Sin embargo, cuando vi la adaptación de Prieto con Rulfo, pues por un lado creo que se fue pues como a replicar a Rulfo en cuanto a los diálogos, ¿no? Cuando tú ves la película, puedes ir recitando justamente cada uno de los diálogos de Rulfo. Y no solo eso, sino que también respeta la estructura fragmentaria de la novela. Además de ello, pues lo que creo que sí hace Prieto, pues es finalmente elegir qué fragmentos va a poner. Pero ahora, a nivel fotografía, para mí también replicó la fotografía de Rulfo, ¿no? Y les voy a poner algunos ejemplos, porque justo sabía que me iban a preguntar ello, para que puedan ver de qué manera Prieto, que sí finalmente es un gran fotógrafo, pero y que ha tenido hasta premios Oscar al respecto, Denme un momentito porque esta es otra. Aquí está. Pero finalmente, lo que creo que va a hacer es replicar la fotografía de Rolfo. Del lado izquierdo pueden ver justamente algunas capturas de pantalla de la película Pedro Páramo y del lado derecho es una fotografía de Juan Rulfo. Entonces, lo que va a decir Rodrigo Prieto es que justamente él hizo, ¿no?, un pequeño libro o tuvo imágenes de Juan Rulfo, de su fotografía, para inspirarse y replicar su estética. Sin embargo, creo que no solo se inspira en Rulfo, ¿no?, en la propia fotografía de Rulfo, sino hay encuadres casi exactos, ¿no? Como pueden ver aquí, justamente Abundio, esta es una fotografía de Rulfo que justamente edita, ¿no? Y entonces podemos ver casi el mismo encuadre. Otra, pueden ver esta, que aquí esta es una actriz de la película La Escondida en la que trabajó Rulfo y la que tengo yo a mi izquierda es una fotografía de Prieto, justamente. Esta es sin duda Rulfo, ¿no? Aquí podemos ver perfectamente el encuadre de la ventana que hace Prieto y está replicando casi tal cual la fotografía de Juan Rulfo, ¿no? Entonces, vean esta igual, ¿no? Incluso este palo que está del lado izquierdo lo podemos ver claramente en esta fotografía que también es de La Escondida. Entonces, para mí es como casi un hecho que no solo se inspira Rodrigo Prieto en la fotografía de Rulfo, sino que muchas veces quiere replicar algunos encuadres. Veía una entrevista que hizo Rodrigo Prieto junto a Iñárritu, y Iñárritu justamente le hacía esta pregunta de qué tanto inspiró la fotografía de Rulfo para él hacer la propia fotografía de la película de Pedro Páramo, y contaba justamente esto de que sí tuvo pues un compendio de imágenes que le ayudaron a replicar las atmósferas y la estética, ¿no? Pero también contaba que justamente había visto el capítulo de fotografía de la serie 100 años de Juan Rulfo, que hicimos Juan Carlos, Douglas y yo hicimos ahí también parte de la investigación, y que justamente en este capítulo de la fotografía lo que hace Juan Carlos y hacemos como equipo es ir a algunos lugares fotografiados por Rulfo y tratar de realizar ese encuadre, ¿no? Si no han visto la serie, pues los invito porque pues es muy atractiva y justamente está un autorretrato de Juan Rulfo que es muy famoso en el Nevado de Toluca. Y fuimos, ¿no? Juan Carlos y los fotógrafos y los camarógrafos y el de sonido y yo justamente a subir el Nevado de Toluca para poder hacer exactamente, encontrar la piedra donde se sentó Rulfo y hacer exactamente la misma toma. Y decía Prieto en esta entrevista que justamente a él lo inspiró mucho este capítulo que nosotros hicimos en esta búsqueda del encuadre de Rulfo y ver qué miró. Finalmente creo que él también intenta hacer esto en su película, ¿no? O sea, y estas solo les pongo 5, pero para mí justamente uno de los éxitos, por así decirlo, de la película, o que gracias a eso ha sido pues tenido tantas vistas, es que no solo replica los diálogos de Pedro Páramo, que pues sabemos que es un éxito, o sea, Pedro Páramo es la novela más traducida de México, en más de 100 idiomas se ha traducido Pedro Páramo, no solo replica la estructura fragmentaria, que justo en ese momento de los años 50 va a ser un parteaguas en la literatura mexicana, sino que también está replicando el ojo de Rolfo, ¿no? Que si bien él en muchas ocasiones, estas son algunas, ¿no? Tiene también sus propias aportaciones, evidentemente, él tiene su propia carrera como fotógrafo, incluso dice que la fotografía no la hizo solo porque él aquí estaba como director, pero no la suelta totalmente, sino que trabaja con Nico Aguilar, y justamente para mí también está, vean, o sea, esta es tal cual, ¿no? También está recreando el ojo de Rulfo. Entonces podemos ver muchas atmósferas rulfianas en esta, justamente en esta película. Entonces, pues saquemos conclusiones. Ahí les dejo las imágenes.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, the translation was not working very well in this. And so I'm really happy that you showed us some images, because it made me understand that, yes, indeed, there seems to be a connection between the photographs and the photography for the film itself, which seems to me to go hand in hand with the fact that it was not, we haven't mentioned this yet, but the dialogue in Prieto's version comes entirely from the novel. There's no, unlike the other versions where some dialogue was written, all the dialogue in the film is literally lifted from the novel, which I thought was interesting. Unfortunately, the subtitled Doug did not use your translation for this. Doug, you wanted to mention something?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Mateo Gil is the screenwriter, right? Rodrigo Prieto did a lot of work to finesse it, but he wrote the original. And that was one of the comments that I made when I reviewed pre-filming, was how glad I was that the novel took almost all. I mean, there are a few additions, but it almost comes exactly from the novel. And I think that's a real positive, because the novel is so focused on the sound of the words and the atmospheres that Juan Rulfo creates. And so rewriting dialogues just doesn't make a lot of sense. One of my biggest disappointments with the film, however, is kind of related to that. Rodrigo did have a copy of my translation, which came out in late 2023 before he filmed. But unfortunately, he didn't, as I understand it, didn't have any control over the subtitles. And so the subtitles are inventions, probably mostly by AI. I don't know. Sometimes they get it right. Often they don't. I think that's a real tragedy that the subtitles don't connect as strongly to the original text as the dialogue itself in Spanish. I can also tell you that I'm very disappointed with the dubbing. We've talked a lot about Netflix and kind of its effects on local markets. That's one of the things that I certainly didn't grow up with, was the ability, almost it's forced, right? The other day I pulled on Pedro Páramo, and it came up automatically in English. I don't like dubbing a whole lot. And the dubbing is a disaster. Maybe I shouldn't say it that clearly, but even just the tone and texture is really important to understand Pedro Páramo. Sometimes Rodrigo Prieto gets it right, sometimes he doesn't. But if you don't feel the weight of this town that is in purgatory, that's condemned to hell, you really don't understand the novel. And the dubbing just doesn't work. So the dubbing actually moves away from the original Spanish, and then it takes one step further, and the voices that they used don't feel the weight of these characters who feel agony and pain and condemnation. And sometimes that comes through in the original Spanish in this new adaptation. Sometimes it doesn't. I was watching listening to the dubbing earlier this day, and it's a completely different movie. And unfortunately, it's not very strong. So for those of you who haven't seen the movie yet and don't speak Spanish, get the translation, or get the translations. Don't listen to the dubbing, because I think that's unfortunate that we're losing some of the weight of the original novel.
Juan Carlos.
Yeah, that's important, very, very important. I would like to know about you. What do you think about this subject? Because the dubbing is like the novel again. Okay, the images are over there. You could see the film. You could feel more or less the atmospheres in which everybody are over there. But what do you think about, like, a spectator, like a viewer, for this mixing between the subtitle and the images? You as a viewer. It's a question.
Yes, no. I mean, I think this is correct, and it's a problem for. I mean, it's always been a problem for cinema since the introduction of sound, and when they stopped making dual copies of film in different languages in the early days before they could actually record properly. But I was wondering, still again, perhaps on a personal note, I mean, Manuel Garcia Rulfo is related to you. He's your nephew, I believe.
Yeah, it's movie.
Did you have any contacts with him as to his the way that he was going to play the character of Pedro Páramo, or the use of language? In fact, we're talking about diction and how important that is. Again, I don't speak Spanish, but everything I've read about Rulfo mentions the importance of, you know, his use of language, and that his use of language is not common. It's very particular, and that it requires a lot of I mean, it's one thing that the previous versions of the films that did not have precisely the language of Rulfo, and that the language of Rulfo is something that is that has to be worked on, and that actors have to be very, very careful in rendering it. So
Yeah.
was that a conversation that you've had with your nephew? And also, how, I mean, was your father, how does the language in the book, how does it relate to your father's use of language?
Well, several questions at the same time. No, I didn't be in touch with my nephew in that sense. He is like that. He's talking like, he's all the time in the common life, he's like that. I mean, he didn't force a lot to be different in that sense. You could watch him at, what is the other film in which he is, Douglas, is Lincoln
Lawyer.
Lincoln Lawyer. You could watch it and look at this. He's forced to put away from the Jalisciense acento, no? It's from Jalisco. So, but in another, for instance, another a character that is very good for me is Abundio, that it starts at the beginning of the film, as well as another one is Fulgor Sedano. He's amazing, and he's a very good actor. He creates all the atmosphere, all the character, all the way to speak in his own way. So it's important to say that. And I do believe that, of course, they have a kind of a coach for that, for instance, for the kids, and for many, many actors. For example, the priest was another one. With any kind of accent, he's like that. In that point, when the priest and Susana were talking about the death, that kind of scene was very important for me, and it was amazing. It's a very universal point of view. There is no accent, there is not a specific tone for the novel, for example. In some ways, yes, but not at all. But it's different, for example, when this the scene in which is the Pedro Páramo's mother, when she came, knocked the door, opened the door, and says, "They have killed your father." And it's a very bright scene. Nothing happens at all in some way. And for me, all my life, I was thinking that it could be a scene very dark. You were sleeping, and something happens that changed your life forever. And that moment is, for me, one of the plots in which your life could be changed for Pedro Páramo in that sense. So it's a tricky thing. Sometimes it's a kind of disbalance between, of course, the actors, the way in which the actors are, naturally, and in which the actors are working for their own work. And in that sense, I feel there's a very disbalance in that sense. But it's important to keep talking about the translation, because of course you are talking just about the common story, but you are in several parts of Mexico as well, in several parts of Canada, or you name it. There is an accent. There is a way to express your ideas, or not to express to talk, but maybe with not too many words. Maybe with a few words, you could say a lot of things. And that's the most important in the sense of my father in that sense, in that point of view. So I'm not sure I'm explaining myself in that sense. But for me, it's what I love. I mean, in my own work, I was talking all the time with the people. I love to hear the people talks. So please, it doesn't matter what you could say, just talk about your life, whatever, just say it. And when you find out somebody like that, some kind of a good way to say things, it's a precious thing. And that's because maybe I am a documentary man, not a fiction man, or not a filmmaker in that sense, but because you are working, trying to find out those kind of people who used to talk in a very specific way. That's what my father loves to search, the way to speak. And all his work is a kind of a collection of specific gold medals of words. So in that sense, since that moment, it's very, very complicated to make a good translation. So when you have a good images, so it's another part in which you could create a good atmosphere or a dramatic construction, just to be a companion of that kind of issues about the language.
That's very interesting, because it seems it gives me the impression, at least, that we can think about your father both as an ethnographic linguist as well as an ethnographic photographer.
Exactly.
And that both of these aspects of his work come together in his approach to life in Mexico and his own life, right? Because the scene that you mentioned where Pedro Páramo learns about the death of his father, it's hard not to think that your father writing this was not also thinking of the death of his father.
Of course, that's it. And in that sense, what do you think is, why not to have a lot of details of that moment, very specific details. It's not a long shot. It's a lot of details about the light, about the eyes, or something like that. More intimate, in a more intimacy way to get the characters or the actors in that sense. So that's the difference between this adaptation of the other ones, as well as the images that I have in my mind, or maybe you would like to have, because you would like to be deepest in the characters more than just to receive words, for example. That's a difference, very, very intimacy difference. And another thing is, just to finish with my idea, is at the beginning of the story, the people from Netflix wanted to, the Chivo Lubezki ones, they wanted for him to make the film. So they have a clear for sure that they would like to have a photographer to make this film, and not Guillermo del Toro, Cuarón, or Iñárritu. For me, it could be a disaster. I prefer Rodrigo's or Chivo Lubezki. But what I'm trying to say is, they knew that the main point to start to create this film, it was the images. it could be
Well, that's
dangerous.
interesting.
So
I mean, we were a little bit critical of the film, for not living up to the experimental aspect of the writing, and I think that's fine. But at the same time, I did notice some really interesting things in the way that the adaptation goes about. So, often in cinema studies, we tend to say, okay, well, we're interested in the film and we're going to look at the film in itself, regardless of the question of fidelity to the text, and because that's either a red herring or a rabbit hole. But watching the film, I had an interesting, at times I saw that there was interesting ways of translating some of the written material to both image and sound, right? So Mark mentioned the opening shot of the film, this downward crane bringing us to the underworld as a sort of foreshadowing of what is to come. But there's something else I thought very interesting. If you look at the first and last sentence of the book, and Doug, I'm going to use your translation here. The first sentence is, I came to Kamala because I was told my father lived there, a man named Pedro Páramo. And the last sentence describes Pedro Páramo's death in this way. It says, he hit the ground with a hollow thud, crumbling as he were a pile of rocks. And so there's an obvious connection in the two sentences here. They're both about Pedro Páramo. But in the second, the name has been replaced by a pile of rocks. The name is not mentioned. And of course, Pedro and Piedras are linked etymologically, just as the narrative relates the death of the father with the death of the son. And so the film connects, and what I thought it was fairly subtle from Prieto's perspective, the film connecting the opening and the ending, not just narratively and not, of course, through etymology, but visually. The first post-credit shot shows Juan Preciado at the crossroad on a barren land. And barrenness also belongs to the word Páramo. But most importantly, if you look carefully at the first shot after the credit sequence and the last shot of the film, you'll see the last shot, it has Pedro Páramo lying dead on the ground. And the first shot has Juan Preciado waiting at a crossroad. Both of these shots are taken from the same angle. One where also the angles of the hacienda, the media luna, reproduces that of the road that are meeting, the roads that are meeting in the first shot. So this instills a sense of circularity through which the film seems to read the novel as it moves the novel back and forth through time in ways that are, in the film, more legible, less striking, but at the same time as a way of translating that circularity that is so fundamental to the way temporality is presented in the novel. So I was wondering, perhaps as we're about to close our meeting, I was wondering if any of you had further thoughts about either the mise en scène or of the film, or more generally about the difficulties of adapting magic realism to film, which is a topic we haven't mentioned, but there have been other attempts at adapting magic realism to film, and very often they fail because they materialize something. It's like surrealism as well. They render material something that is inherently not. Doug, you had a
Yeah, I'll let others talk about the magical realism. I just wanted to make one correction to the quote you had, because it's my favorite line. I think it's one of the most impactful lines of Latin American literature ever. And in English translation, it actually says, I came to Comala because I was told my father lived here, not there, a man named Pedro Páramo. And that's really significant. And I would suggest that that opening sequence, what Prieto is trying to show is the fact that I don't think he ever fully lets his spectators understand that the now time, the present moment of this broken chronology is a conversation in the tomb by Dorotea and Juan Preciado. And so that dropping down into the tomb, right, is very, very important. And it's really, really important that at some point the readers, and Juan Rulfo is trying to confuse his readers, right? He's trying to make you feel the confusion that Juan Preciado feels when he makes it to this town where everybody seems to be dead, right? And he doesn't quite understand what's going on, and we don't understand that either. But we do have to know that that conversation, that first one, I came to Comala, is taking place in Comala, in the graveyard, between Dorotea and Juan Preciado. And if you haven't read the novel or seen the movie yet, I apologize for letting in on that, but I think everybody has. But that here versus there is really, really significant in the novel.
Yeah, you're right. And I can't believe I said there because it's very interesting. Anyway, yeah, absolutely. That's the interesting part about the film, is that it does give us a track that he's already dead when we first see him. And the here is in the grave. Exactly. Anything about the other aspects of the mise en scène or adapting magic realism to cinema?
I'm not a specialist on literature, but by researching a little bit before, I found this amazing voice, Pedro, El Llano en Llamas fragments written by Juan Rulfo, and I think that was like the super incredible, because it's like I could imagine, I could make my own movie, and I think that's like I will just suggest to do that. They are in many platforms online, and when you listen to Juan Rulfo like talking the way he did, I mean, and this is also something that I discussed with Remigio, is that we all had our Pedro Páramo in our families, because it's common at the end. This language belongs to another era, like very revolutionary, very ancient, but it's fascinating the way you can fully connect with it. And I think that could be like the best adaptation ever, just listening to the voice of Juan Rulfo and his tales, and that's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone in this room. Thank you to people online, and thank you for our panelists. I hope to be reading more of your work. Juan Carlos, I hope that we'll be seeing your entire series on Netflix, not just one film out of the series. Thanks to the consulate, General Consulate in Montreal. Thanks to Fourth Space. Thanks to Espacio Mexico. And we're signing off. Oh, hold on. We actually have a little bit of time for some questions, either online or in the room. So I guess yes. Are there questions? Yes, we do have.
Yes, if we have some questions, please raise your hand. We'll get a microphone to you. I think we have time for about 2 to 3. I see 2 in the audience. And for those online, if you have a question, feel free to pop them into the chat. We'll read them out.
Yes, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Doug for his wonderful new translation. It's really quite an improvement, especially how you translated the subjunctive and the conditionality of everything. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hola, buenas tardes. Es un comentario. Mi nombre es María Morfin Gutiérrez y yo viví en el pueblo de tu padre, Juan Carlos, de San Gabriel. Mi familia viene de Jiquilpan y por supuesto que hice mi escuela primaria en San Gabriel y la escuela secundaria. Y en la secundaria hacía concursos de literatura y la primera, por supuesto, libros que tenemos que leer son los de tu padre. Me encantó El Llano en Llamas. Ese fue mi primer descubrimiento y por supuesto la visita a la casa de tu padre en San Gabriel. Eso es el ritual que tenemos en el pueblo de San Gabriel. Y por supuesto estoy hoy aquí porque representa mi infancia y me veo conectada con el vocabulario de tu padre porque es el vocabulario en las zonas rurales del sur de Jalisco y conozco muy bien esas expresiones porque viví en ese entorno, tanto en San Gabriel como la Guadalupe o Tapalpa o todo lo que realmente es el ambiente rural y cómo se vive el modo de vida en ese pueblo. Así que estoy muy contenta de ver la película, que a mí no me gusta el cine, porque en ese entonces pues no había cine en el pueblo, solamente podríamos leer y puedo ver a lo mejor ese lado conectado, más conectado, digamos, de cómo te lo imaginas en el libro, lo que nos quiere decir. Sin embargo, aprecio todo detalle de la naturaleza que pusieron, que realmente eso es lo que apreciamos en los pueblos, es esa ligereza con la que podemos ver el cielo limpio y cada detalle de la lluvia o cómo huele la tierra o simplemente porque es el modo de vida. Eso es lo que yo aprecié, cómo representan ustedes en la película la naturaleza que nos entorna en ese ambiente rural. Así que un gusto conocerte a distancia y bueno, desde aquí a Montreal esa fue una motivación para desplazarme hasta aquí, simplemente para agradecerte porque me conecta a mi infancia en la escuela Edmundo Figueroa en San Gabriel y la escuela secundaria 37.
Habría que hacer la semana rulfiana en la universidad, en donde pasáramos toda la serie que hizo Paulina y Douglas y te sintieras más cerca del paisaje y de la zona y podríamos hablar del lenguaje y del descubrimiento del lenguaje propio también en cada región del mundo, en este caso en Montreal, o en los barrios, o en el país de Canadá, no sé. Pero gracias, estás invitada. Ah, el comercial es, vayan a ver la serie 100 años con Juan Rulfo en Netflix.
Pues ahí lo voy a ver. Y bueno, espero que tengas la motivación para poder quizás hacer un documental sobre el entorno donde vivió tu papá.
Vayan a ver eso, es lo que les digo.
¿Es
Vean.
eso? Ah, bueno, pues eso es lo que quiero ver. Eso sí me interesa. Además,
Pues toda mi vida me la he pasado haciendo eso y puedes verla. Es donde se puede ver en Netflix, es lo que he logrado poner. Ahí 100
excelente.
años con Juan Rulfo. Es
Bueno,
un
pues muchas
capítulo, es lo que
gracias.
decían. Son 7, pero solamente hay uno puesto.
Y encuentro súper interesante que estén interesados en esa literatura que marca una historia de México. Y yo creo que ahora significa mucho por este cambio también en gobierno. Nos dice algo de manera moderna, pero es un estado, digamos, que se presenta en cambios sociales. Y yo creo que también en esa época era un momento para significar esos cambios sociales y distancias digamos, en el mismo entorno. Así que gracias y un gusto.
Gracias a ustedes.
Thank you. Just want to close this event by thanking first Martin for the great moderation. Thank you very much. I think you deserve a round of applause, please. Also to our panelists that had the time to connect. I know it's Friday. Many of you have a lot of things to do, so I appreciate, and it's a very good indicator to have this full room today. I also want to say thank you to Doug and Douglas, and I think that today we prove the phrase first with what happened with the translation, and also with what Doug was saying, that translator betrayer, so traductor traidor. ¿No? Finalmente, quiero agradecer, I want to thank my colleagues from Concordia International that are in the room, Suzanne, Vanessa, and William, for all the work that you put to make sure this event was successful. Thank you very much. And of course, Remigio and the Consul of Mexico for coming to Concordia and choosing Concordia as the house to present the movie. Thank you. And I hope this event is just the beginning for many more discussions. I think we need many hours to really understand and discuss this movie. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for joining us here online, and those of you here in the space, thank you for your comments and your questions. We're gonna be closing up the Zoom and the live stream now. I just want to remind you that this remains available on our YouTube channel. You should revisit it, you should share it, and you should have a wonderful weekend.
Muchas gracias a Juan Carlos, a Paulina y a Doug por estar aquí en esta conversación. Queremos recordarles que vamos a cerrar la sesión de Zoom, pero pueden encontrar esta conversación en nuestro canal de YouTube en CU Fortspace y lo pueden compartir con sus amigos y colegas. Y otra vez, muchas gracias por estar aquí y les deseamos un lindo fin de semana. Muchísimas gracias.